The Antarctic Gate that rewrites history. The alert hit at 3:17 Universal Time Coordinated. Grid E73 lit up like a siren. Magnetics spiked, gravity dipped, and every clock on the line stuttered the same way. 12 seconds missing, all at once. The medic swore her watch jumped. The pilot said his fuel calc didn't. Then the satellite pass showed a ripple, a lattice shadow under the ice that shouldn't exist. To understand why that burst terrified the room, you need one detail they never meant to surface. Buried inside a Pentagon and Department of Energy Antarctic Geophysics Annex, sealed, code-stamped, courier only, were anomaly tags with coordinates they quarantined out of the public grids. AdMap tiles that never shipped. Gravity cells flagged, non-natural morphology. The stakes? Whole sectors closed, rival agencies fighting over access, contractors flown in under kitchen equipment manifests. Whistleblowers whisper corrupted timestamps, erased logs, and teams that rotated out without their memories lining up. And there's the sketch. A blind remote viewer drew a ringed lattice that matched a classified sensor geometry. They could call that coincidence. What scared them wasn't the drawing. It was the column in those annex tables where clocks drifted inside the perimeter and snapped back when you left. The contamination, leak, witness, and first distortions. 3 years after the AdMap. One release in 2001, when everyone applauded roughly 1.5 million line kilometers stitched into a first continental mosaic. A handful of new flights traced an odd contour over Queen Maud Land. The public map smoothed it. Internally, that contour got a label string and a fence. After the early 2000s satellite era, CHAMP launched July 15, 2000, refining crustal signal. GRACE launched March 17, 2002, and later GOES launched March 17, 2009, filling the polar gap. The black budgets arrived on the ice with a purpose. Find the places that didn't average out. AdMap 2, years later, would expand the compilation to around 3.5 million line kilometers. The fence line in these notes started in the gap between those eras. Enter the geologist. 10 solid years in open literature, co-authored gravity grids, field seasons logged with the usual Antarctic bravado. Then a contract shift. NDAs stacked. Publications paused. Conference entries list family leave, then vanish. An HR record marks a transfer to advisory. University pages purge his profile like he never taught the isotope lab. His LinkedIn froze mid-sentence. The first leak arrived as a quiet packet. No return, hand-scanned pages, and a careful smear over names. Redacted aeromagnetic transects with massive deltas framed by ordinary crust. Gravity gradiometry lines that should have rolled with topography but kinked in place, like the field was bending around something. In the margins, a notation. Phase window? Under that, a column labeled delta T_local. Tiny microsecond nudges tied to GPS waypoints. Off by themselves, harmless rounding. Stacked across a polygon, a pattern. Here's the human check. A field medic wrote later that her watch stopped in a whiteout. Not slowed, stopped. She tapped the face, heard the tick, then nothing. Back in the tent, the mission's audio, routine check-ins, status calls, played silence. The recorder was fine. The files existed. The waveforms were a flat line between two normal bursts. She thought it was the storm. When she synced her notes, the timestamps didn't match the station's base clock by 12 minutes. Her supervisor told her the batteries were cold. Meanwhile, fuel burns crept up. Generator loads surged in rhythms that matched nothing on the manifest. GPS tracks smeared into ribbons that later reprojected as straight lines, but only after the database recalculated. Contractors logged cleanup flights with no cargo weights, then filed maintenance slips for avionics time-based recall. On paper, none of it contradicted anything. In the field, people stopped trusting their watches. They quarantined a grid. Safe perimeters marked with flags and audited by teams that measured nothing more exotic than magnetometer background and the hum of old diesel. Families were promised routine work. 4-person crews ran resurvey lines. Everyone signed the clause about systems interference they thought meant static. To grasp why the sketches rattled the room, you need the sealed annex they didn't expect to leak. The inventory lists are dull until they aren't. Map overlays with transparent polygons that never appear on public AdMap layers. Borehole logs ending with halted per directive, while the next page jumps a page code and a watermark generation. A stack of superconductivity notes about handling sensor drift at low temperatures. And there, the forbidden drilling zones. rectangles align not with geology but with timing beacons. The concrete anchors are what make this more than a campfire story. Anomaly labels like MAW, 73B Delta, coordinates pinned to within a quarter kilometer, timestamps down to the second, and page codes that march in perfect order except where the chain breaks and a courier's receipt substitutes for a lab stamp. The phase drift column sits off to the side, labeled as instrument bias, then crossed out in pencil. Across 7 surveys, inside the same outline, co-located clocks diverged by microseconds, then reconciled at the flag line like nothing happened. Chain of custody records wobbled just enough to be noticed. Off-books couriers sign with initials, not names. Page counts misaligned by 1 in 3 packets. Watermarks switch generation mid-run, as if a binder got rebuilt after a meeting no one logged. Footnotes use language that reads like deniability practice. Observed offsets consistent with known sources. Known to whom? Why does phase drift matter? Because if you can push a cluster of clocks off, even a hair, on demand, you can test, target, or weaponize time rate locally. It doesn't need science fiction. Gravitational time dilation is real. GPS lives on that correction. The controversy lives in the claim that something under the ice induces drift without mass explanations. The Annex doesn't argue it. It logs it. They needed a check outside the chain. Someone who could observe without stepping onto the ice, without contaminating the perimeter. A contractor floated a solution that sounds ridiculous until you remember it's documented. Remote viewing. The tasking ran through a third-party cutout. Blind target numbers, no geographic cues, with standard CRV protocols and AOL breaks recorded to keep the session clean. The viewer they picked had a track record on verifiable mundane targets, shipping yards, a test antenna farm, a cluttered office with a lopsided fern. Not perfect, but enough hits in the declassified set to earn a second look. In the first session, the viewer reported cold that wasn't just temperature, pressure, a sense of being pressed inward, and something they called humming geometry. They drew concentric rings, a lattice that echoed through their sketch with a repeating motif, nodes in a circle that seemed to phase in sequence. They wrote the words gate-like, then crossed them out, replacing it with gating sensation. The team comparing that sketch to the Annex map overlays went quiet. The classified geometry, nested toroidal patterns guessed from magnetometer contours, wasn't public. The sketch was close enough to be uncomfortable. Correlation isn't causation. The session notes can be read as metaphor, but the sketches put image to a thing the Annex only implied. If the drawings were random alignment, the field data should have stayed boring. It didn't. The magnetometer lines in the resurvey started to sing, broadband hiss stuffing SDR recordings, compasses smoothing to 0 like they'd given up trying, and body cams desensing by frames that added up to lost moments no one could explain. A medic wrote, "I lost 12 minutes," in a notebook she wasn't supposed to keep. The logs later overwrote themselves for storage efficiency. One copy survived, hidden where no audit would look. A consumer backup card stuffed in a toiletry kit, checksum mismatched, but still breathing with a low-frequency pulse. A heartbeat that matched the Annex's frequency bands line for line. And 2 frames of shadow geometry, where no topology could throw a shadow that way. If the machine breathes, someone tried to talk to it. The sealed Annex, what wasn't supposed to leave the vault. The Annex wasn't a single binder. It was a stack of lives compressed into paper. Map overlays, borehole logs, superconductivity notes, and a page of drilling bands that drew rectangles where geology drew curves. The shipping slip called it Antarctic Geophysics, supporting, as if it were a footnote. Inside, the first overlay cut straight across the public story. Transparent polygons that never appear on AdMap tiles, pinned to coordinates with quarter-kilometer precision, and labeled with strings that read like a code word and a dare. MAW73B Delta, GDL10R5, BRV2C Omega. The borehole logs read normal until the line that ended everything. Halted per directive. Next page? A jump in the page code, a watermark generation 1 revision newer, and a courier receipt where a lab stamp should be. The superconductivity notes weren't about experiments. They were about keeping clocks honest when sensors decided not to be. Low-T drift mitigation, rubidium reference pair, co-located phase-locked. Then a scribble in pencil. Not enough. It's the concrete that bites. Time stamps down to the second, every sample bracketed by GPS waypoints. Gravity cells flagged non-natural morphology. Strong words softened in the footnote to non-conforming residuals. 7 survey flights, different aircraft, different teams. Inside the same outline, co-located references drifted by microseconds against each other and drifted back at the flag line. The column that said it out loud was tucked off to the right, grayed in layout but alive in the data. Phase drift, delta T_local. Then, in the margin, a thick black strike and a typed replacement, instrument bias, delta T_R. The pencil came back anyway. Observed, not corrected. Chain of custody should be boring. It wasn't. Couriers signed with initials, not names. Page counts misaligned by 1 exactly where the drilling bands appeared. Watermarks switched generation mid-run, as if a packet got pulled, replaced, then re-photocopied to look seamless. And still, the seams showed, an out-of-order page code, a staple scar, a ghost of a previous header bleeding through the toner. The Annex never says, "Don't drill here because time slips." It says, "Forbidden drilling zone, transmission hazard," and lets the footnote bury the meaning in acronyms. Then there were the beacons. Not the usual GPS augmentation notes. Timing beacon arrays operational, tied to rectangles tilted off true north by a few degrees, repeating across polygons that don't match rock fabric or known faults. The frequency list is mundane if you don't cross-reference it. Low kilohertz bands that appear again in generator load logs and in that backup slow pulse. Someone was setting a metronome. Someone else wrote sequence, with a question mark that felt performative. The inventory ran like an apology. Attached, magnetometer transects, redacted, gradiometry residuals, select, superconducting reference drift memos, drilling restriction list, Rev 3, beacon emission protocols, Rev 1A. Each attachment wore provenance like a loose shirt, copy of a copy stamped twice, then blessed by a section head whose signature is a block print with no flourish. If you believe the dates, the polygons went on paper before the first whiteout watch stopped. If you believe the courier slips, a rewrite happened the week after. Why does any of this matter? Because the Annex treats phase drift like a nuisance while reorganizing entire operations around it. Bias is the word you use when the instrument is wrong. Drift that reconciles at boundary is what you write when the world is doing something your instrument reports correctly. If you can push clustered clocks a hair off rate in a defined space, you're in GPS territory without gravity as a crutch. You're also staring at the worst export control nightmare on the planet. The deniability is baked in. Footnotes hedge into passive voice. Offsets consistent with known sources, without naming a source. Known to whom? The Annex doesn't speculate. It logs, fences, and moves people, then relabels the column. It's the move you make when the data threatens the budget and the mission in the same breath. Keep it boring. Rename the monster calibration. One memo broke tone. Superconducting reference pair exhibited 7.4 microseconds divergence within perimeter while optics remained stable. Drift reconciled on egress. Recommend compartmentalization of timing anomalies under separate annex. Signed by a lab lead whose later memos never mentioned drift again. His next contribution is a best practices sheet for time-based recalibration, with a bland header and the same list of beacons. The last page was a list of people cleared to see the list. It read like a roster for a project that doesn't exist. DOE Materials, Pentagon Systems, a contractor with a footprint in Time Standard Labs, and a foreign liaison marked Observer Only. Across the bottom, a handwritten line. Phase drift column removed in external distribution. You can redact a cell. You can't make a medic's notebook vanish, or a spouse's duplicate card, or a pulse that shows up where sound shouldn't be. The remote viewing tasking, unofficial eyes on a classified target. They didn't want a psychic. They wanted a sanity check that wouldn't light up a procurement ledger. So the tasking went out through a cutout, anodyne language, a contract line labeled Human Factors Assessment, and a set of blind target numbers that meant nothing to anyone outside a small room. No coordinates. No photos. Just 8 digits on a card and the standard CRV protocol, from the 1977 to 1995 Stargate era ideogram. Descriptors, sketches, break when the brain tries to guess, log the AOLs, reset, keep your pen moving. The viewer they picked wasn't a celebrity name from old books. He'd put in years on dull, verifiable targets, industrial yards, river crossings, a wind farm with a broken nacelle, an office with a crooked fern, and a poster of a mountain he misremembered as sea. On scored trials he'd landed details better than chance, worse than myth, good enough to make skeptics grit their teeth and auditors hedge the language. The file described him as responsive under protocol, limited flourish, low confabulation. He'd already told a reporter once that he didn't believe in magic. He believed in doing the work. Session 1 started cold. The viewer wrote dense, then cold that pushes inward, then pressure in the ears, like descending in a plane that won't equalize. He drew quick arcs, a central void, and a series of nodes he kept circling, muttering, repeating. The note-taker marked AOL. Tunnel, viewer breaks. No, he wrote hum, struck it out, replaced it with vibration felt, not heard, jaw buzz, teeth ache. On page 4 he sketched concentric elements that made the monitor stiffen. The sketch wasn't art, it was shorthand, rings, a lattice-like band, and little ticks around the circumference like a clock face missing its numerals. He wrote gate, then drew a heavy line through the word and penciled gating sensation, underlined once. The room noted damp palms, shallow breaths, physio signs that show when cognition meets threat. Protocol held. They asked him, the same blind target wrapped in a different number. He arrived by a different door, was given tea he didn't drink, and he went in again. Stacked, he said. Something prefers sequence. He tapped the paper at each note on the ring, as if counting. 1, then this, then here. The monitor didn't flinch. Describe the environment, she said. He wrote dark, clear, bright edges, then buried. He sketched a grid overlay without being asked and circled a sector he described as thin. His hand shook briefly. The note-taker logged physio, tremor 3 seconds. The comparison came later, under fluorescent light. The Annex overlays with their nested toroidal guesses sat next to the viewer's pages. Nobody said match. They said echo. The page with the ring and ticks mapped uncomfortably well onto a classified geometry derived from magnetometer harmonics they'd never circulated outside the Annex. The viewer's phrase, prefers sequence, landed next to a list of beacon emissions arranged in repeating windows. Correlation isn't causation. The team wrote exactly that at the top of the memo in block letters. They did a control. A decoy target, mundane, public, a harbor yard with cranes and salt air, got the same treatment. The viewer drew cranes, smelled oil, heard gulls, complained about the sound. He scored what he usually scored on ports, decent descriptors, messy specifics. Back to the blind set. He returned to pressure, to a hum that wasn't a sound, to circles nested in circles. He wrote countdown made of silence, and then self-corrected. Intervals between events. The monitor told him to stop naming, describe. He said, it chooses a path based on timing. The note-taker marked AOL again, machine. Skeptics in the room didn't soften. They tightened. They asked for replication, for cross-viewers, for taskers who didn't know a thing. 2 more viewers were brought in months apart. One drew a spiral staircase that went nowhere and a rectangle of no-go. The other wrote, door under thin ice, and then stepped away from the table to breathe. The best overlap was the shape language, concentric motifs, nodal points, a sense that changes came in pulses. All of it could be metaphor. The memo said interpretive 3 times in 1 paragraph. Here's what moved it from campfire story to problem, the timing. The viewer's intervals lined up, roughly, with the beacon cycle lengths listed in the Annex, and with incident logs from the field that clustered around those same windows. It wasn't proof. It was a pattern against a pattern you weren't supposed to see. The contractors wrote the sentence like a dare. Non-causal alignment noted. Operational caution recommended. If the sketches were coincidence, the field should have gone quiet. It didn't. The next resurvey bled broadband hiss into SDRs, compasses ironed flat, body cams slipped frames, and a medic wrote about 12 missing minutes in a notebook she hid. Palms sweaty, pen gouging paper. The Annex would later rename a column. The viewer never heard about that. He just turned in his pages and went home, told his partner he'd drawn circles all day, and slept badly, waking with jaw ache like he'd been grinding through a takeoff. Field Team Alpha, the day the clocks quit. They called it a milk run. For people, a tight loop inside the flagged perimeter, and a checklist that felt almost insulting in its simplicity. An ops tech who'd flown this grid twice last season. A survey lead who trusted instruments more than stories. A field medic who double-noted every vital like she was writing for a jury. And a junior geophysicist who still smiled when the wind cleared and the horizon went sharp. Families had breakfast calls scheduled. The perimeter had been audited the week before, safe zone verified, beacons steady, background magnetics ordinary. The clause about systems interference looked like boilerplate. They signed anyway. From the first waypoint, the magnetometer started throwing a halo. Nothing dramatic, just a rise that didn't match terrain or the last pass. The junior tapped the display and frowned. The survey lead said, "Ride it, log it." Half a kilometer in, the SDRs picked up a hiss that filled the band edge to edge. Not noise tied to the generator, not a storm front, the kind of hiss you get when everything is speaking at once. Pressure built in ears, jaw joints ached. The medic radioed base to confirm calm clarity. The channel was clean. The recording wouldn't be. Voices began to echo. Not a delay, not a bounce off ice. Words doubled as if they had a shadow. First the ops tech heard his own mark come back clipped. Then the medic's copy folded on itself by a breath. The compass the junior liked for its stubborn analog needle smoothed to zero, like it had decided north was a rumor. The survey lead ordered a full stop. Body cams caught the same scene from 4 angles and couldn't agree on the time. One cam dropped frames, 2 drifted a second apart, the 4th tried to correct and fell further behind. The medic checked her watch. She'd synced it at the flag line, the way she always did. The second hand was steady, then shuddered, then ran. She wrote the numbers in her notebook, because writing made it real. 12 minutes evaporated across 4 wrists in different ways. One leaped, one stalled, one crawled, one insisted nothing had happened. They tried to reconcile by GPS. The track smeared into a ribbon, the display struggled to draw. The ops tech swore softly, the way you swear when you're tired, not scared. Then he noticed the fuel readout didn't match the plan. Frost lines shifted on the snowcat's body like the sun had moved, but the cloud ceiling hadn't budged. The medic brushed a glove across a handrail and felt a grit that wasn't ice. Later, under a microscope, that grit would look like sintered crystals, welded without heat. A rope they'd strung for a quick traverse felt wrong in the hand, tauter a hair shorter. Not enough to flag as damage. Enough to make the survey lead pull it down and coil it with more care than usual. They tried to restart the line. The magnetometer went from halo to spikes, clean verticals that looked like someone had drawn a barcode on the earth. The junior checked the harness, and the cables like the error lived in a connector. The SDR hiss rose and fell in a rhythm that made no sense until you remembered the Annex's low-frequency list. The survey lead, who didn't believe in patterns unless a graph insisted, began to see one. He called base again. The response came back normal. The recording of that response would be silent. Human bodies betray before instruments do. The medic's nose bled, a thin line under a balaclava that made her tilt her head and blink like she'd stood up too fast. Salt at the back of the throat, metallic breath. She said she was fine. The junior felt pulled thin, as if the space between thoughts had stretched. Words arrived late, like wading through syrup. He didn't have language for it yet. He reached for his pocket compass out of habit. The needle drifted, then stopped, pinned to nothing. A tremor started in his fingers he tried to hide. The ops tech took one more magnetic line, because quitting on a line felt like losing. The spike nearly pegged the scale, and everyone's breathing shortened at once. They turned around on a mark they'd made in snow minutes earlier that looked older than it should. At the flag line, the body cam snapped back into agreement like a scolded choir. The medic's watch settled into rate as if nothing had happened. The GPS track reprojected as a normal loop when it hit the base database. After the recalculate, dialogue no one admitted existed. The survey lead filed the incident under equipment irregularities, because there was no other box for it. The review came down hard and clean. Equipment failure, environmental stress, batteries in the cold. The body cam desync? Known issue, firmware slated for update. The SDR hiss? Generator interference, though the harmonics didn't match. The magnetometer spikes? Cable strain, despite the harness logs. The clocks? Observed offsets consistent with known sources. Personnel were rotated stateside for rest and maintenance. The medic kept her notebook. The junior lost his smile in the airport bar. Logs overwrote themselves for storage efficiency. The raw captures that didn't match the summary were archived to a volume that suddenly didn't exist. A maintenance ticket appeared for avionics time-based recall and closed itself with a green check. The ops tech got a new assignment that didn't involve the ice. The survey lead received a recommendation for further training in cold weather electronics care. Families heard, routine rotation, everything normal. But a copy had survived. Not out of defiance, out of habit. The ops tech had mirrored the body cam cards to a consumer backup tucked in a toiletry kit, because he'd lost data once on a ship and never forgave himself. That card would sit in a bathroom drawer for 3 weeks, next to a spare razor and a travel toothbrush, until someone at home would run a checksum and frown at the mismatch. The heartbeat under the silence would still be there, exactly tied to windows the Annex pretended were maintenance. And the medic's line in her notebook, "I lost 12 minutes," would land like a small, hard stone in a pond that never stopped rippling.